Hey everybody, this is Caesar, aka Critical Art 64, here with the third installment of my Reddit art critique. I picked this piece. I thought I would mix it up and do an anime piece here. Chose this one because it's really easy. Thought I'd just knock this one out real quick. But let's see, I call it Red Jacket Lady. Done by Millicent, or as they would say in France, millicent. Cool. Okay. Yeah, let's open this. Let's open this up. First things first, I always like to start out with the strengths. First thing, the reason why I picked it was I like the aesthetic. Very good aesthetic. It's the style of anime that I like to draw. I think he said in the description that he's inspired by Shigenori Soejima, who did Persona, that high contrast, semi-realistic anime style. I can kind of see that. So that would be the main strength. Pretty cool, pretty neat design. But let's get into the critiques here. First thing that I noticed with this is that the lighting is very odd. See, the key to this style is the language of line. And in order to do the language of line, you have to understand light and form. So first, you must first understand how light works, know the light direction, and then you have to, because all we really see is light. We don't see form, we don't see anything else, we just see differences in light. So first you must understand how light moves, from which direction, how intense is it, how it diffuses, how it reflects, where it highlights, where it falls, where it doesn't. Understand light. But to understand how light reacts with an object, with the form, you have to understand exactly everything about the form. You have to be able to construct a form like this, sculpt it out of clay, in order to understand how the light is going to react to it. That's real key. So one of the ways that helps is if you know your anatomy. Now, the reason I bring those light and form up is that you're doing a high contrast, line heavy style of anime, and to understand the line weights, right? You have some that are thick, some that are thin. Why is that? The thin is where there's the most amount of light. The thick is where there's the least amount of light. So to know where to properly make some of the lines thicker and some of the lines thinner, you have to understand the shape and you have to understand the light direction. That's going to inform you exactly where you want to change the line weights here. Let's go over to mine. So notice on mine you can really clearly see the light is what would be called standard lighting, which means that it's coming from the top left. You can see pretty much the exact angle on how it's coming down consistently across. And that's going to tell you where the thinner lines are and where the thicker lines are. Thinner, thicker. Thinner, thicker. So that's real key. But yeah, you have to practically be able to sculpt your figure out of clay. One way to help this is to really understand your anatomy. I'm going to say this over again. You know, it's almost like I'm obsessed with skeletons. You have to draw your skeleton. So you have to understand what parts are protruding because it's bone, and which parts are protruding because it's muscle, which parts are protruding because it's fat. You have to understand that to understand the shape. And then you have to understand where the light is coming from. And then where the light falls is going to tell you how to do your line work. And that's how you could do more with less. That's the essence of anime. Another thing you have to consider is anime is designed so that it can be animated. So while you're drawing these things, you have to be able to flip the form around multiple times. So you have to be able to turn the form. So you have to imagine, what's this going to look like when she turns her head? What's this going to look like when she turns her body? You have to think about that while you're drawing. Otherwise, you're going to end up with flatness. And if you don't got your skeleton in right, it's going to look like Parappa the Rapper.
Kick, punch, it's all in the mind. If you want to test me, I'm sure you'll find the things I'll teach ya. Sure to beat ya. Nevertheless, you'll get a lesson from teacher. Now kick. Kick.
You're going to be kind of floppy. So let's look at the skeleton here. If you notice, there's no hip bone. Now that's going to make your body look really young. But then if you notice, her eyebrows are really thin, her mouth is wide, her lip is really pronounced, her jaw is defined here. And this is communicating that she's older, like in her maybe mid-20s, late 20s. And then, you know, the breasts are suggesting age, but then the body, without the hips, you can't tell how old. So with mine, I kind of made her mid to late 20s, just based on how you did the face, right? So the hip bones, understanding how they're shaped, how they jut out, how this hip goes up slightly because that's where the weight is put on her leg. You have to understand how the shoulders are constructed. On yours, the arm is too far back at this angle. This arm would be down here like this. This is too far back. It's almost like she's hugging her arm back forcefully. Now, a little bit of proportion here. The arm's a little long. Torso's pretty close to proportion. But if you look at the skeleton again, the cranium is humongous. Now, you can get away with this in anime, but then you have to really start distorting everything. But to get that high contrast style, you really have to understand lighting. I would also suggest, since you're such a fan of Shigenori Soejima, I don't know if you've heard of these other guys, but there's Tomio Fujisawa. He does the Tekken art. Really good stuff there, especially when it comes to perspective, which I will get into. Then there's Yusuke Kozaki, and he did the No More Heroes art, which is fantastic, very textured, also with a forced perspective, similar to Tomio Fujisawa. And I would also suggest taking a look at Takeshi Koike. I'm sure you've seen his stuff. He did Animatrix, Afro Samurai, Red Line, among others. He did the reboot to the new, what was it, Lupin the Third. Really great stuff. I would definitely check them out if you're into that dynamic, high contrast style. But that leads me to the third thing. So to do that style, you have to understand your light and you have to understand your form. Now the third thing, which if you do not understand, you're always going to look slightly off, and that is, where is your eye level? That's going to dictate where things foreshorten, right? So if you're drawing a whole body, the eye level here is about the top of her chest. So you see, that's where the eye level, the hips are going to want to skew this way. The legs are going to skew this way. If you could see the feet, they would skew up to the left. Now if I put the camera up here, the shoulders would now skew down this way, right? You have to understand your perspective. So 3 things to get that Shigenori Soejima style that you want so bad. You have to understand perspective, how the figure is drawn in perspective. When you're taking the picture with the camera, is this subject above you? Is it below you? Is it at your eye level? And that's going to tell you where where things are foreshortening towards. And understanding the form of the light and the perspective, you will now understand what kind of lines to use. For instance, the closer the object is to the camera, the thicker the line. The more receded, the thinner the line. If it's darker, the thicker the line. If it's lighter, the thinner the line. There's a language to the line. But in order to do that, you have to know your perspective, your lighting, and your form. And that is absolutely key. 'Cause another thing is, you can tell by how you drew the jacket that the form got away from you. You don't know where to put the wrinkles. Without the wrinkles, this makes this look kind of like a plastic. Maybe something that Ronald McDonald would wear. Really rigid, no wrinkles. Maybe something that the cowboys from Winona's Big Brown Beaver by Primus, but the cowboys are wearing that plastic look. When you don't put wrinkles, that's what you're going to get. Now, to understand how to draw wrinkles on clothes, you have to understand how the cloth is being pulled by the form. Where is the stress being put? Where is it hanging on? Where is it receding to? Where is it being tucked? And you have to understand the body. So understanding the body is really key here. This breast really got away from you. Look at this. At this trajectory, I mean, what is it going to do? I'm not sure. This one, probably something like this. Yeah, that is a bit off there. This eye is not, the eyes are not quite the same plane as the face. You made this eye a little bit too big. Kind of get a Bubs from Homestar Runner kind of look. You gotta be careful with that. This is going to be a thick line. This is going to be a thick line. This is going to be a thick line. This is, the light is coming from this direction. Then thick line, thick line. But now this is going to stay a thin line. This will be a slightly thicker line. This is going to be a thin line. This is going to be a thin line. You're not too far off, but then where you lose it is the shadows. Because over here is telling me that the light is coming from the top left, but it wouldn't cast like this. This is too far down. The light wouldn't cast. This shadow is off. I'm not sure why you put this shadow when the light is coming from here. That's a bit off. Now, with mine, I took your idea. I got, I'm kind of made it more a leather jacket. That's indicated by the floppiness of it. If it was like a lighter cloth, it'd be more pointy. The wrinkles would be finer, but you could tell it's a little bit thicker by how it wrinkles. Also, the thickness I gave the collar. So it's kind of like a motorcycle jacket. So I gave her Japanese motorcycle Sakura gloves, which I referenced. I kind of see these motifs as maybe there's the Under Armour on the jacket and the pants for when you don't want to get road rash. So I kept that motif going. I mean, she's wearing a bralette, which are real popular these days. So yeah, just a little bit of that. Also with the hair, I would suggest putting highlights in there, especially if you're going to put highlights in the eyes. You would see some highlights on the hair. The color selection is pretty solid, but you go a little bit bright on the skin, that's going to weaken your highlights. But I mean, you're going for that high contrast style, so I'll kind of give that a pass. Definitely. So in summation, again, study your anatomy. Study your anatomy. So what is that? Get a skeleton. Understand where the bones are protruding from. And that's going to give you your underlying foundation of your figure drawing. So you must study your skeletons. How the muscles attach. because you're not just drawing lumps, you have to understand where the muscles are attaching on the bone. You're going to have to know where the fat goes. Like the breasts, they have to hang. They're fat, bags of fat, they hang. The hip bone is really important here. Also on composition, you typically, if you're going to crop out a figure, let's say if you're just doing a head, you want to cut it off about right here, maybe here, right here, because there's the gesture line. So there would be good, because that's where the form starts to turn inwards. Now if you back out and you're doing a bust, you would do it right about here, because that's where you still have this inward motion. Now if you're to cut it out, you can cut it here because of the way the rib cage curves in, or you can cut it and crop it about here, because that's where the hips start to turn in. Or you can cut it below the knee. You'd never really want to crop on the joints. Don't be afraid. Draw the hand. Learn the hands. If there's something that is challenging, I want you to change your attitude. Instead of avoiding it, instead of procrastinating, when you got something difficult to draw, I want you to get excited. It's an opportunity to learn. Get in there, you draw the hands. Everybody wants to crop out the hands. Draw them. You will not regret it. It's a second point of interest, right? You see, there's the eye movement. That's the way I darkened it up here, where you start out down low here. This captures your eye because of its warm color and the detail. You look at the hands, but then you travel up because of the jacket, and you end on the face, where the eyes are bright. You got to think of that. When I did this, I did 3 different iterations. I would suggest doing this from now on too. Before you get at this, I know you mentioned you draw with a lot of lines when you're not drawing on a tablet, when you're not using a program. That's okay. I do roughly 3 drawings before I touch a computer. The first one's just a conceptual drawing. I allow myself to make mistakes. It's just the conceptual one where I just focus on the point of interest. I throw it down. I don't really care if I'm off. I let my creativity run free. Then the second one, I refine it. I start adding in anatomical ideas to it. I start playing with the form inside my head. So by the time I get to the third one, I have the form more or less realized. And that's where I do the detail work. And that's usually the drawing that I work off of. Sometimes I might even trace that and make it even cleaner. So just lengthen your process. That's really key. I look forward to what you do in the future. This is a good aesthetic. It's one of my favorite anime aesthetics. But I think that would sum it up.
Yeah.